Hello and welcome to season 14, episode 11 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop, and you just got me into a bad mood right before we got on.
Oh,
So
that's good. That's good. I
maybe I
wish
get
I
some
could say it was hard to do. Um,
All right, you're turning me around. You get me in a better mood.
we are, of course, reading Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind, this time talking about chapter 11, English Conservatism Adrift, the 20th century. So looking at some early 20th century conservative thinkers. Again, not a very uplifting chapter. We're at this period in time where he just kind of says, like, yeah, there's brief little moments of success, brief moments where people have some good ideas, and then everybody just kind of moves on, and conservatives don't really have any influence in the world. And it's really kind of bleak and depressing in this time where everything's just slowly marching forward, and nobody really seems to care about the past and tradition, and conservatives are losing all of their power everywhere.
Well, and I guess it's important to document the truth
Yeah.
because and I can only imagine how he would view modern day England,
Hmm.
uh, which is a totalitarian leftist state compared to this dark time that he describes in the early 1900s. I mean, it's out of control, and so I mean, I it's kind of a hard read this just chapter. I mean, he's a good author, but I kept feeling like, dude, I don't care about parliamentary procedure and
Right.
this party and that party. I'm more interested in conservative thought
Hmm.
and conservative philosophy. It'd be like writing a book about present day, Trump and getting into the minutia of what the majority leader of the Senate said. He said,
Right.
okay, but there was the one author I thought was interesting and made a lot of good points. What was his name? Mallock or whatever those.
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with any of the people he wrote about in this chapter either,
Yeah.
and so I'm confessing my ignorance every episode. Well, he does mention Arthur Balfour, and so I was
Hmm.
interested. I had heard of him mainly because the Balfour Declaration. He just mentions it in passing, but of course that was the modern thing that got the ball rolling on a modern Jewish state.
Hmm.
The Balfour Declaration, which was, that they have a right to homeland, according to, he was, I think, a foreign secretary or something at the time. But basically declaring that there should be a Jewish state. And then that was followed up, of course, after World War One with the formal creation of Israel.
Hmm.
So, so I did know of him, but the other ones I hadn't even heard of. Yeah, W.H. Mallock, which I
Hmm.
thought had some really interesting um, thoughts as summarized by the author. But the other guys, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's really worth talking about too
Yeah.
much, quite frankly. Other
Yeah. I think
than
this.
there's this era in time right around the turn of the century where the conservatives slash Tories slash traditionalists that were having a devil of a time
Hmm.
having anybody that even spoke for that political philosophy or espouse those beliefs, and is just a series of rearguard actions, just trying to slow down the march of the socialists
Hmm.
without a whole lot of inspirational thought or speech.
Yeah. Yeah, the first person, yeah, it's George Gissing, and then we go to Balfour, and then to Mallock. And yeah, I 100% agree. Mallock, I think, was the only one who I thought was really interesting in any way in
Yeah,
this chapter.
right.
I think this is kind of the problem as we get towards the end of the book, is he's just trying to lump so many different people into this sort of history. And like, it'd be interesting if I was, really into early 20th century parliamentary politics. But
Right.
in terms of like a history of the conservative mind, of conservative thought, like I get it. It's not a very, very good time to be writing about these things. And maybe there's not a lot of conservative thought happening. But yeah, he does spend a lot of time talking about these people who I really don't think are quite conservative, or if they are,
Mm.
they really didn't have any lasting impact on conservative thought as a whole.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I guess we can sort of jump right into things then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he sort of sets the stage as he does with all of these chapters, with sort of what is going on in the political climate at this time. And it's kind of an interesting time, I suppose, in politics, because he mentions, on page 328, that there is some signs of success for the conservatives, as their old enemies, the liberals, were weaker in spirit and support since they had been than it had been since the days of Fox, and they were doomed to further splintering. Their only legislative success in 1894 marked their immersion in the collectivistic current. And so it's the idea that they're just drifting towards socialism. That's not super popular, but then again, the conservatives aren't popular either. And it seems like nobody's really getting anything done. It seems like everybody's just sort of kind of apathetic towards the political world at this time in English history. Nobody's really proposing ideas that are very popular. So that's sort of the climate that the conservatives are merging into, sort of in the late 19th century into the beginning of the 20th. Seems somewhat
Yeah,
similar to our modern day, where, at some point it's just like, who cares about what's going on in Congress? Because they're just doing either nothing or the stupidest thing you've ever heard in your life.
yeah.
So it's some similarities to what happens recently.
And I'm waiting for. Can you hear me right? I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
if my
Oh yeah.
audio.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm waiting for an effective parliamentary politician.
Hmm.
We haven't had a really good. I mean, I guess you'd say Nancy Pelosi was really effective as a speaker,
Hmm.
but she wasn't effective as a guardian and protector of the prerogatives of Congress.
Hmm.
It was about partisan politicking. She was effective at getting things done for the party. But what I mean by that is like there were eras in American history where you had a Speaker of the House that was like the most powerful person in the United States in
Hmm.
many respects. I mean, as far as being able to get legislation and change policy and all that sort of thing, and to do effective oversight of the executive. And we haven't had, we've had this imperial presidency for decades now, and I think until we get politicians in the House of Representatives that will be effective, I think we're really in dangerous territory. I mean, I really like Trump with a lot of his policy proposals, especially in the immigration stuff. And I think he's right about most things, but my gosh, the Congress doesn't do anything,
Hmm.
you know, and they didn't do anything under Biden. And I think it's really dangerous, where we're concentrating power in the presidency, and I think it's the bigger danger, of course, is a bureaucracy, which is this fourth branch that shouldn't exist
Right.
in its present form. I think there could be something, but they have to. The president has to be able to administer. You can have these independent agencies, which is one other topic, but I also think Congress needs to assert itself and pass the laws. Like, they passed the War Powers Act. Of course, every president since that passed has claimed it was unconstitutional, and nobody's really followed it effectively. But they still fund everything. It's like I'm not saying I'm against this Iranian thing, but don't you think Congress should have a role when the actual Constitution says the Congress declares war?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, shouldn't somebody seriously say, yeah, you know what? Other than Rand Paul,
Yeah.
I mean, like he's the only one, and everybody views him as some kind of gadfly. And I think they must hate him or something. Like that nobody
Hmm.
ever does anything for that guy. But anyway, so I mean, like, I'm reading this about Parliament, and there's like a reform. I think that they emasculated the House of Lords when they were
Hmm.
trying to. I think it was under Balfour or one of these in this section of the chapter. They're saying that because they were too obstructionist, the House of Commons just reformed it, so to speak,
Hmm.
and took away a lot of their power and their oversight. But it's like I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of parallels with modern America,
Yeah.
where the elected representatives to Congress, which are supposed to be the closest to us, because in theory, I could get a hold of my Congressman Jason Smith.
Hmm.
He was in Jefferson County, according to Facebook posts like 2 weeks ago. So I probably could have tracked his ass down if I really, really wanted to. I can't track down the president.
Yeah.
I mean, like I can't track, meaning like not like I'm heard any of these. I mean, like where I could track him down and say, "Hello, I'm Mark Bishop. I have
Hmm.
this concern about that's important
Hmm.
that I want you to address." I could probably get that done if I was persistent over a month to get to my congressman, maybe. There's no way I would be. Well, maybe my senators, if I'm polite about it, if but but to actually have any impact on them, it's very difficult and it's impossible for the presidency. It's just too
Yeah.
big of a country. And so we have this like runaway federal government that they don't have any individual accountability to anybody. It's like this collective decisions by the voters, this democracy.
Yeah.
And anyway, sorry, I went on kind of a long rant on that, but I'm really concerned about it, and I
Hmm.
have been for a while. That our legislature just abdicates all their power. I mean, if I was in Congress, I'd be like, no, you're not doing that. And,
Hmm.
and I mean, why aren't there more Congress critters? I guess they just don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it really comes down to it. They care about getting reelected. And if, I don't know, don't you think that's weird though?
It is very weird. It's very weird. Yeah, it's just they're just kind of sitting there and not doing anything, and it seems like an odd strategy if you've pursued this whole
Yeah.
career in politics for presumably your pretty much in your entire life. Now you get there and nothing really seems to happen. Maybe nothing has been happening for the past 20 years, and it just
Yeah.
seemed like more was happening, 10 years ago or so. But I think it's just nothing really seems to make a difference. But yeah, it seems like that's sort of the same political climate as this period of time in England, and that kind of brings us
Yeah.
into the first topic. Unless there's anything else you wanted to say about the introduction section there.
I
But
could
yeah,
go on
the first guy is George Gissing, who is interesting insofar as he really changed throughout his life. He was a super radical. He has this great quote towards the top of page 332. He says he began as a political and moral radical, a positivist, and a socialist. This is a quote from Gissing. We have a destructive task to perform. We must destroy the state church and do our utmost to weaken its hold upon the popular mind. So he's writing that in 1879. He says, by hacking away here and plowing there, surely the field will at length be gotten to something like a state fit for the sower. Then, of course, he completely changes his mind. He's like, well, that was crazy what I was saying back then. And he
Yeah.
becomes more of a conservative. I do like what he has to say at the top of page 333. Because he's talking about like science and making all of politics a very scientific process. But he says 2 decades later, after 1880, he says he confessed his folly. Science, whether speculative or applied, is a chief instrument for increasing the misery of our time. It's a quote.
Yes.
I hate and fear science, in quotes, because of my conviction that for long to come, if not forever, it will be the remorseless enemy of mankind. I see it destroying all simplicity and gentleness of life, all the beauty of the world. I see it restoring barbarism under a mask of civilization. I see it darkening men's minds and hardening their hearts. I see it bringing a time of vast conflicts, which will pale into insignificance. The thousand wars of old, and as likely as not, will whelm all the laborious advances of mankind in blood-drenched chaos. So very, very
Yeah.
strong language there. And of course, this is leading up, just a couple decades before, World War One and then World War Two. So he's absolutely, kind of right in the practical level of, where modern scientific progress would lead. But I think also like the fact that he's putting like science in quotes is, I think, very, very much still relevant, right? The idea that there is some sort of objective, right, beyond any political ideology, beyond any personal incentive, like science out there that, scientists, especially those involved with politics, are some sort of neutral, uncaring, indifferent group who can just dictate things however they want. And I know exactly what rant this is going to lead into, but I think it's, clearly still a problem.
What,
No?
what rant was I going to go on?
COVID.
Well, I don't know. What rant?
COVID,
Oh,
obviously.
oh, gosh. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, trusted the science. I mean, it's
That's
that could
perverse.
have been, yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking. I was completely thinking of a different rant. Oh, yes. I've kind of gotten off of my COVID rants. I haven't
Yeah.
ran on COVID, and we haven't talked about Tolkien almost
Mm,
this entire season.
that's true.
Yeah. I mean, Well, yeah. I mean, it's wild. This year, 2026. We're finally seeing some people, few, come to terms with the mistakes they made during
Hmm.
COVID, both about the masks and the lockdowns and all that stuff, but a lot about the vaccines and about science writ large. Like this, and the global warming
Mm,
stuff. It's and a lot of that is, of course, because the Trump administration is forcing a lot of those issues to actually to kind of verify the science, if that makes sense. Like it's really not. See, that's why I wasn't even thinking of COVID because
Mm,
I think really what the problem with a lot of the COVID stuff was it was like a religion,
hmm
and it wasn't even really science. You know, it
Right.
wasn't logic. I mean, that was my big problem,
hmm
is it had nothing to do with logic. It was all contradictory, and meaning like well, you know you have to have 6 feet of separation. There's no science for that. But or
Yeah.
you can you'd have to you walk into a restaurant with a mask on, and then you sit down and you take off the mask. And I was just thinking the other day, I don't know that people younger than you. So like when they're in middle school during COVID, like
hmm
just a few years before they'll have some memories of it, but they were kids. And so
Yeah.
when you're a kid, you just kind of do things or whatever. I don't think that people much younger than you will really appreciate how effed up that whole situation was
hmm
and how I mean it really was really scary. I mean it really caused me a little bit of anxiety about how people were such sheep,
hmm
especially Americans. I've said this before. I thought Americans were more independent minded,
mm
and I was completely disabused of that during COVID. But no, I was actually thinking about the scale of science and the dangers associated with automation
mm
and independent machines. I mean,
Yeah.
and people are just, and I know some people are talking about with some concerns about AI and these robots. I'm telling you, we're and it's funny because Elon Musk, who I talked about it periodically, has a really sophisticated view of the benefits of AI and all that stuff and of beauty.
hmm
So he's a visual, the pictures and the videos, and trying to get that even more ever more granular, so that people can make their own art. And he calls it art, but it's I guess in a way it's art, but
Yeah.
it's it's dehumanizing in a very real way, and I have big concerns with it. But we're I think people are not prepared for the industrial scale drone wars. Like we think of the Clone Wars from Star Wars,
hmm
and that was so antiseptic because they were fighting these robots, and they're kind of dumb robots, but they're kind of independent, and it really they did kind of murder a lot of robots.
hmm
The Jedi or whatever. But the robots didn't execute humans or the humanoids, which I don't think is logical. I think they would absolutely massacre men, women, and children in a total war situation. They wouldn't just go after enemy combatants.
mm
And I think that's our near future. And I don't like to watch really any videos coming out of Ukraine, but the drone warfare
Yeah.
is insane there.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
Um, and, um, and the guys, running from these little machines, these little robots coming at you. I mean, I'm telling you, it's coming to us.
hmm
And if China's serious about being a world power, they're going to be attacking us real soon. I mean, all our ships are over in the Persian Gulf area,
Yeah.
and if they get our electrical grid, I don't think they have enough mass-produced drones to kill us all yet.
Well, that's good. On that happy note,
Yeah,
um,
well,
talking about
the glorification of science as
yeah,
opposed to religion and beauty and things that are really important to
yeah.
us. People are just sleepwalking towards oblivion at this
Right.
point. But
Well,
anyway,
speaking of beauty, that seems to be one of Gissing's points. Kirk describes, a lot of his earlier novels are, praising, the radicals and revolutionaries, and he sort of has this turn in his life. He says his later novels, for the most part, are prolonged protest against the frustrations and loneliness of modern life throughout all social classes. And on 335, he says, for the arrogant secularism of modern thought is destroying everything beautiful in our literature and philosophy. The sound old parson is making way for whited sepulchres like the Reverend Bruno Chilvers of Born in Exile, one of his books, who declares in private, The results of science are the divine message to our age. To neglect them, to fear them, is to remain under the old law, whilst the new is demanding our adherence. To repeat the Jewish error of bygone time. Less of St. Paul and more of Darwin, less of Luther and more of Herbert Spencer. It's exactly that idea, right? The praise, the glorification of science, of technology, that it's going to replace, we're at this new wave of sort of intelligence and beauty and art, and if we just keep up to date with these technological advancements, right, it'll make us humans even better, right? Sort of the transhumanist idea was very much alive and well in the late 19th century, in sort of a different way, but I think we're still seeing that same attitude play out, where it is some aspects of this are a religion to some people, both on the political side of things, but then definitely with some of these Silicon Valley types, right, who aren't very, religious from the beginning. It seems like this has become their religion in some ways, especially with the AI related stuff.
I have noticed that a lot of these, at least their public statements on these podcasts, because they have these long form interviews, I'm seeing, what is it? It's like, what's the famous atheist who mentioned, like Elon Musk is one of them, but who's the famous
I
atheist?
know who you're talking about. Richard Dawkins, who claimed
Dawkins.
that, yeah, his AI was alive and just so happens to also think it's a woman. And that's a weird thing for him to do.
Oh, it was him, but I was referring to him talking about how the Christian belief system is the
Mm,
best belief system, for a functioning society. He doesn't believe in Christianity or God or whatever. But I see kind of like this agreement and this kind of vague spiritualism, even from Musk, who's I think at best agnostic, but he's becoming closer and closer to realizing the beauty and wisdom of the and of Jesus' message, similar to Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson was famously an atheist, but then he
mhm,
spoke on the Old Testament, I think, like Genesis
yeah.
extensively, and about the Christian philosophy. So it's interesting, but I think our art and beauty has become so uh, uh, diminished and diluted
Hmm.
that this AI stuff is better than any humans creating on a mass scale. Any sort of popular. I mean, what's we mentioned offline that we just saw that the Hail Mary Project movie, which was really good. I
Hmm.
really appreciated it, and that Gosling guy is a pretty good actor. It's not, I don't know if it's great, but it's really good.
Hmm.
Um, and it's an exception rather than a rule. There's so many bad movies,
Hmm.
um, and and so it's like I don't. Where can you go to see art? And you have to go find it. You know,
Right.
and it's like none of it's really popular. The good stuff. Um, but anywho, so I think that's part of the problem is that like the artificial, the AI stuff, by comparison, is really good
Hmm.
to actual popular art.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's
I
a
think it's,
danger. No, it's
yeah.
not real.
Yeah, I think the problem isn't that AI is really good at doing things. I think it's just we've gotten so bad at doing things that we should be doing. Where just all of our output, for the most part,
Yeah.
is pretty garbage. Um, but
Yeah.
to get back to the book, I don't have too much else to say about Gissing. He has some comments on how democracy is sort of foreign to English tradition, right? Sort of it's just similar mantras that we've heard already. But I think to move on to Arthur Balfour,
Yeah.
I like the way he starts his section. He says, one of the most interesting and least successful party leaders of the past 100 years. Wow, that's high praise, I guess. But he says, yeah, he's just a very odd figure. And really his thesis throughout this is that he really represented something that didn't exist anymore, right? Sort of the amicable, sort of like English gentleman. He was kind of the last of that type. And that just wasn't working for anybody anymore, right? The conservatives moved towards more of the commerce, more of the sort of market principles ideas, right? And that's really where the party was going, right? Just appealing to sort of the middle class interests and things like that, a more populist, I guess you'd say, idea. But he was still really trying to argue in favor of keeping this aristocratic principle, and he was sort of the old English gentleman. And for that reason, right, he's an interesting look at things, but he was almost entirely unsuccessful in almost everything that he did. And so just kind of, it's sort of a glimpse of, what used to be, and then he was kind of swept away in the tides of change.
Yeah. And I like this description. One of those fortunate gentlemen who can walk over tracks. He was a master of ambiguity and compromise. And I think that really is, that's at the bottom of the 337. I think that's a description of like the old school Republicans, of my youth. It's like we had a congressman here, I guess I probably shouldn't say his name. And he retired recently, and then it was redistricted. So it's not the same district as Smith, that's the current congressman. But he retired. I remember seeing him. He was like an old school business chamber of commerce type Republican. And right when Trump hit the scenes, I saw him at it was Jefferson County Days, like a Republican, or, yeah, or what is it called, Lincoln Days, at the Republican gathering at a little hall on the other side of the county, and he was there, which is unusual. But he made a trip in, and he was giving this pro-Trump speech,
Hmm.
and I could tell he did not believe a word of it, not a single word of it, and um, but he was very impassioned, fake impassioned about it. And there's like some of the people there were really eating it up because they love Trump.
Mhm.
If you say good things, it was early in the Trump's, campaign, the first go around, and then at the end of his tenure, it was before he announced he was going to not run for reelection. He said he never really criticized any Democrats. It was always kind of nonpartisan. This is what we're for. And every once in a while, he'd say some criticisms of the Democrats. But at the end, when he had the most anger and vitriol. There's a local radio station that he would talk to every month. He had the most vitriol for that. What's it? Gates out of
Oh
Florida, when
yeah.
he was fighting the speaker and
Hmm.
ended up getting him bounced. And he said more bad things about Matt Gaetz than he'd ever said anything bad about any Democrat. And he was so angry and like he was passionate about it. And that quote about walking through the snow and not leaving footprints is a perfect description of this guy. He was in Congress, I don't know how many years. I don't know what he did,
Hmm.
but once it got like the people were like, "Hey, you got to do something." I asked him, I asked him at Rotary. Uh, 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 he was. Did I tell you about this? He came in and he spoke. This was when the Republicans had control of the House under
Hmm.
Obama, but not the Senate. And so he was decrying the deficit spending. And so I said, so then there were questions from the audience. Somebody asked, no, what really pissed me off is a lobbyist friend of his sat at our
Oh.
table.
Oh, good.
And the guy said, well, what do you do? Because he brought this guy with him, or he came with him, a big fat guy. And anyway, so he says, well, I work in Jeff City. And they said, oh, what do you do there? Because like there's a bunch of like insurance guys and local business owners. And like, what do you do in Jeff City?
Hmm.
Because they're expecting him to actually produce something. He says, well, I'm a consultant. I forget what he is, some
Hmm.
BS thing. I said, oh, so you're a registered lobbyist? And he says, yeah, I'm a lobbyist. So I already was not happy about him misleading us because like,
Hmm.
just tell us you're a lobbyist, we're not retards. And so anyway, so he asked the first question. Well,
Mm.
tell us, can you tell us what you're doing for the port here in Jefferson County? And I'm just going to tell you that, and nobody listens to me anyway.
Hmm.
That guy ended up being hired as the first executive director of the Jefferson County Port. Complete coincidence.
Interesting.
Well, I'm working on getting a grant for the Jefferson County Port. And that's going to mean jobs for this community,
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. And so that really pissed me off because I'm like, okay, you can bring a lobbyist, we'll buy him lunch. And he can lie to us about who he's doing, and that's fine. He
Hmm.
fessed up. But then you're going to have him plant a question. So then I decided I'm going to ask a question. So I
No,
said,
no.
yeah, you mentioned how, it's terrible. Obama's spending all this money and big deficits. And I said, it's my understanding that all spending of the federal government originates in the House. And
Hmm.
I think I think the Republicans have a majority in the House. So isn't it true that Obama can't spend a dime without you all signing off on it? Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. What do you want us to do? Shut down the government? And I said, well, you got to do what you got to do. He says, well, what's your plan to balance the budget? He actually asked me that. I said, well, I'm sure I can come up with something. So I'm like debating this guy from the audience at a Rotary meeting, and I, sometimes I get over my skis about being confrontational with people, and it's just I was angry when I asked the question because I'm like I was already pissed that we're not yokels,
Right.
you can't manipulate us, and half the crowd are Democrats anyway, probably, and but it's a nonpartisan thing anyway. So after afterwards, I was talking to a couple of the old guys there, and I said, yeah, I probably shouldn't have asked him. I was working with people in class that I should probably try to embarrass him like that. And they're like, no, it was great, Bishop. and I said, um, I don't know why we have people like that as our leaders. They're just such manipulators. I say, I wish, decent people would run for office, but I guess nobody's willing to do it. Like, why not you do it? Like, yeah, I'm not doing it. And I didn't. So anyhow,
here we are.
But he was definitely a man that walked through just like this Balfour guy is described. He walked through the snow and leaving prints. And that's how he was reelected all those times. And then once it started hitting the fan where people were like, hey, you got to do something. Then he's like, I quit. Yeah. I quit. I'm sure he's doing fine. And he was a pleasant person. Of course he was, because that was his job. He thought he should just be pleasant.
Yeah. I like this quote that I think sort of
Sorry about
speaks to
that long.
No, that's all right. I like the quote on 339 that I think it's kind of that same sentiment. This is from Sainsbury, so not the same figure here, but I think similar idea. He says, we can't always help things going to the devil, but we can make them go slowly and sometimes turn them out of the diabolic way. And then just a little bit later it says, fight for it as long as you possibly can, consistently with saving as much of it as you possibly can, but stave off the fighting by gradual and insignificant concessions where possible. And I think just that idea, it's like really just a party of making concessions, right? You're really not fighting anything. Yeah. It's always going to be easier to make the concessions. And you can wave them off as insignificant things, right? Just like this guy with it's much more complicated to actually, fight against the spending and stuff like that. So let's just make concessions and maybe we'll sneak in something into the big spending bill that will help us slightly in one small way, 20 years down the line. All right, it's much easier to take that tactic than it is to really sort of stand up and really fight for things. But yeah, it seems like just this whole section is kind of speaking to that exact idea that Arthur Balfour was really just sort of a man out of his own time, right? Really sort of an 18th century figure, right? And he's just this guy who somehow wound up in modern politics and doesn't really seem to want to sort of stand up and do what politics needed at the time.
Yes, agreed. Let's talk about the other guy who actually was interested in.
Yeah.
Which I thought he had some pretty good quotes about. What else I gonna? Where's he at? I lost my notes. Yeah, Mallock.
Yeah, W.H. Mallock. I thought he was really interesting because it seems like he was just really prolific in just a whole lot of things. He says other books of Mallock's are worth looking into still. His theological and philosophical studies, his didactic novels, his zealous volumes of political expostulation and social statistics, even his books of verse. So it seems like he just wanted to write about anything and everything possible. And he has some really interesting thoughts on religion. I like what he says on 347. He says, as he grew, he came to realize, quote, that the whole order of things, literary, religious, and social, which the classical poetry assumed, which I had previously taken as impregnable, was being assailed by forces which it was impossible any longer to ignore. He turned to the defense of orthodox religion against the positivists and other worshippers of skeptical science, although all his life inclining toward Roman Catholicism and observing complacently that his doctrine and doctrinal disruption had impelled certain serious Anglicans to join the Roman communion, still he never entered into the Church of Rome. So he becomes this really sort of very traditional religious figure. And I just really like that quote because it's sort of an assumption that a lot of people make, I think, and I think we're making throughout the 20th century that like, oh, well, this bedrock, principle of our civilization, well, nobody will ever attack that, right? We don't
Yeah.
really have to defend that now because who would attack the Western tradition? Who would attack sort of classical education in schools? And wouldn't you know it? Well, that's exactly what people attacked. And he made that realization right later on in his life, right? These sort of tenets, these fundamental principles of the civilization, those aren't free from attack. The other side considers those fair game. They're going to try and do everything possible to eliminate those as well.
Yes. Yeah, and it reminds me like the one thing that Trump does more effectively than any other Republican or conservative in the modern era is he would attack some of their core beliefs or
Hmm.
their prior assertions, and he's doing it even more in the second term,
Hmm.
and I think going after higher education is a key thing, the NGOs, so you have to push back. And of course, universities are very important, or they were in the role that they had. But at some point, if you just keep letting the left take over everything, it'll destroy itself.
Right. Yeah.
And he's talking about uh, um, like it makes a point about degradation,
Hmm.
of your soul, or of your spirituality, or of truth, and he says, 349, when man loses sight of moral ends, his degradation commences. And I think that's really true. You almost have to be continually vigilant about it, because if you kind of let that go, or you say, well, it's not important, or you just become like a disinterested scientist,
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm just gonna try to reason my way through this thing without really seeing any meaning in it of it. I think I think you lose your humanity, and that's, I think, part of what his message was back in the day.
Right. Yeah, not to bring it back a couple pages, but I really like this quote on 347. I won't read the whole thing, but like he says, the atheism of the modern world is not the atheism of the ancient. The long black night of the winter is not the swift clear night of the vanished summer. The Greek philosopher could not darken his life, for he knew not from what mysterious source the light fell upon it. The modern philosopher does know, and he knows that it is called God, and thus knowing the source of light, he can at once quench it. What will be left you then if this light be quenched? Will art, will painting, will poetry be any comfort to you? And he goes on and on. He says, like, this is a different kind of atheism, right? Because you've been, in this Christian civilization that's existed, for well over, 1,000 years in England. And so you do know, what are the principles of the civilization. You do know what people think about God. You can't just claim ignorance. You can't claim, oh, well, we just can't, prove this thing. We don't really know. Nobody really knows. You
Mhm.
have, 1,000 years of your country's political history where everybody did know and everybody agreed that they knew, and they built up art and culture and civilization around that. So it's more of like an insidious atheism, I think, that he sees creeping up, that it's a more targeted and it will be a more successful atheism because it's a more aggressive form, right? Because I know most atheists just say, like, well, I just prefer not to believe in those things. It's like, well, it's an active choice that you're making if you're living in this sort of Christian society.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't know. Do you think that those pagans in Greece and Rome, ancient times, they weren't atheists? Would you consider them atheists?
No, not necessarily. But I think he's sort of talking more along the lines of, like they believe like the gods were like within the world in some way. So a lot of them didn't believe in some
Yeah.
sort of overarching, external God, the way that Christians do. But who knows?
Yes. All right. Fair enough.
Yes.
Yes.
But no,
Well, I like
yeah.
moving forward.
No,
Moving
please, yeah.
forward, unless don't keep moving
No,
backward.
no, go ahead.
Uh, I really like where he's talking about, and we have to have a new way of arguing
Mm,
for beliefs. And 351, the author describes them. He says the old conservative arguments are obsolete, Mallock wrote. For the prescriptive rights, the traditionary influences, the ancient respect for property and order, all have been shattered by successive waves of political and economic thought ever since Rousseau. I think that's so true, and I think that's what the modern MAGA movement is finally grasping, is that all those kind of like, oh, well, you have constitutional restrictions, and the libertarian people,
right.
uh, d- there's no um, there's no gravitational pull for their belief system. It's all we're going to have. We need a debating society. Well, when they're in the streets and they have like metal, like steel flagpoles that they will beat you with if you disagree with them, debating the effectiveness of the 14th Amendment as applies to certain statutes in a particular state is not really relevant.
Right.
You
Right.
you have to get back to core basics about law and order and make more meaningful arguments that make a difference to people's lives, as opposed to some theoretical thing about, oh, we should be able to smoke pot all
Yeah.
day and watch porn.
Yeah, you have to agree on the basic principles in order to have a debate. If one
Yeah.
side, like, they don't have the basic principle of, hey, don't assassinate, political speakers of the other side, or presidents, or, like, hey, I have the belief that it's okay to just beat people to death if they disagree with me. That's not something you can convince them in debate is not the case. You have to have those common principles. And I think it just kind of goes back to everything he's talking about here, this degradation, where if you don't have the shared culture and ideology, at least, like basic ideology, then you can't debate. You need to find a different tactic.
Yeah.
I do like what he says because he kind of turns towards Marxism and socialism. In his critique here, I thought was really interesting. He says, labor in itself is no more the cause of wealth than Shakespeare's pen was the cause of his writing Hamlet. The cause is the motives of which labor is the outward index. And he says, well, really, wealth is caused by ability, right? It's not the case that everybody is exactly identical to one another and everybody's labor is exactly the same as everybody else's, because everybody's doing different things. Everybody has different abilities. It seems like just such an obvious point, but I really like the way he puts it, that analogy about the pen and Hamlet, right? That yes, you have to have the labor or the pen in order to put the thing to paper, but you need to have the ability of Shakespeare in order for Hamlet to exist. If you just give a pen to a
Yes.
random person, right, he's not going to write Hamlet.
Well, yeah, and he mentions that a couple different ways within his writings, and is summarized by this author. That there, and it's like you say, it's stating the obvious, but it's something we've all seemed to have forgotten, that some people do things better than others.
Yeah.
Like we get it. The only time we really normalize it, and this is at all age levels, is in sport.
Hmm.
So like I've often, because I had very smart boys and academic high achievers, I always was bristled at, I was always fine, like if there's a soccer star or football star, everybody cheers for that person on the football field or soccer field, and they should. They're those athletes that are high achievers are better at that than the majority, or some of them than anybody. And when I see an inspirational athlete overcoming adversity, I don't really watch professional sports, but I do like to watch like track and field.
Hmm.
And if I'm able to find like a cross country thing, I think that's fascinating too. Because I just, not that I'm a good runner, but I've run before, and I kind of have a sense of how difficult it is and what they're achieving. Or like the marathons, they just broke the record for
Yeah.
under 2 hour marathon. Um, and I'm inspired by them because they can do things that I can't do. No matter how much I train, of course now I'm older, but even in my age group, I can't do a lot of those things. And so I'm inspired by them. And I think we need to come back to the understanding that we used to have as a nation. There are some leaders that are better than others, and they're
Hmm.
better than us. Like I want people who are elected to office that will do a better job than me. I want to recognize that, and I think we don't do that anymore. I think of
Hmm.
course, a lot of it is because they're bad people that we've been electing, and they've done such a bad job over the years. But I think that's in business, and I think that's a core problem, and I think that's really the draw of the socialism and communism with our youth, is because they don't see people doing better because they are better.
Right.
They see people doing better because they gamed the system or they cheated or they got it. He talks about inheritance, and he says, inheritance of property detested by the party of progress is one of the most important incentives to ability. It's satisfying the instinct of bequest and simultaneously providing for saving and accumulation of capital. He's 100% right. And I see that. I do estate planning. And every one of the people that come in, that their main focus is, I want to make sure my kids are taken care of. All this
Hmm.
stuff that I have now, I just want to make sure it gets to where I want it to go in the most efficient way possible. I don't want to have a whole lot of delays. I don't want headaches for them. I want it just to go to the
Hmm.
kid or to charities or a combination of both. And the people that hate inherited wealth because their parents didn't leave them anything yet, because most of these people are wealthy and they will get inherited wealth and they won't want it taxed when they get it.
Hmm.
But in any event, they don't understand that that's human nature, and it's not bad to want to give your stuff to your kids.
Hmm.
I understand the economic system if it gets too funneled down. That there's a rule against perpetuities as far as ownership of land, even. That's a whole different legal subject. Um, but I think we need to get back to understanding that some people do things better than others, and
Right.
and some people have better moral character than others. Like there are better people than me, you know, and I want those better people than me to hold public office. And I don't hear that from anyone.
Hmm.
Do you ever hear that
No.
from anybody saying, you know what, I want this guy elected mayor because he would do a better job than I could,
Hmm.
and he'll take care of us, or she'll
Yeah.
take care of us. And I don't want to have to worry about it. And I know if that person's elected, I don't have to worry about it because they'll do a better job than I ever could. And I think we need to get back to that. We used to have a sense of that,
Hmm.
in some respects, but and let me turn to a more controversial subject. I think I think the trans argument has helped us start down that path,
Mm.
because we were having these weird discussions where we were saying men and women in all things. And that's just not true. It's not accurate. Men as a percentage are stronger and faster and all that kind of stuff. And and it's just not reality to say that we're exactly the same. It just isn't the case. Um, and so the trans argument really brought that to a head, because it's like,
Hmm.
wait a second, why are you opposed to trans? What they say, trans women, which are dudes that were transvestites, dudes that wear women's dresses. Why can't they, play rugby
Hmm.
in the girls section? Well, because they'll murder the girls. I mean, they will literally hurt them,
Hmm.
and it's unfair. And that forced us to have a conversation about what it means to what's the all women are valuable. Everybody's of equal value morally and in God's eyes, and it should be in our eyes. But some people are just better at doing things than others.
Yeah.
And men have certain strengths and women have certain strengths and weaknesses, and men have certain strengths and weaknesses, and I think that's forced that back to reality and back to
Hmm.
the Title IX discussions, which were
Yeah.
funny and really discriminating against men at the time. But now they're finally realizing, wait, there's something to this.
Right.
And so I think that's helping, hopefully, in my mind, helping to facilitate an argument about meritocracy
Hmm.
and those kind of values I was just talking about, as far as our leaders and our elected officials and all that.
Yeah, and I think that goes to a point that he makes here at the end, just the last quote that I'll read from him about sort of having these ideas just need to be ingrained, right? They can't remain just as arguments. He says, arguments like the seed or like the soul, as Paul conceived of it, which he compared to seed. They're not quickened unless they die. As long as they remain for us in the form of arguments, they do no work. Their work begins only after a time and in secret, when they have sunk down into the memory and have been left to lie there. When the hostility and distrust they were regarded with dies away, when unperceived they melt into the mental system and becoming part of oneself effect a turning around of the soul. Right, as long as we keep thinking, right, just through argumentation, we'll get there. It's like, no, it's not just through argumentation trying to convince people. You have to have these things just become part of like common knowledge if you want your sort of ideals, if you want conservatism to last for any long period of time. You can't just keep trying to reconvince people of the same things over and over again. There has to be just sort of a baseline cultural ingraining of certain principles, because just leaving it up to argumentation over and over and over again just isn't going to work. It has to be just cemented into sort of the cultural norms of a society.
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent point.
Thank you. That's about all that I have to say. He has a very short section towards the end where he mentions a couple other people that might be classed as conservative, but none of them really make any impact. I found it interesting. He mentions very briefly Chesterton and Belloc. He says, yeah, they don't really have too much influence. So they're only auxiliaries of conservatism, which I think is interesting. I think Chesterton is, very influential, especially now. I mean, maybe when he was writing this in the 50s, Chesterton hadn't had enough time to really be ingrained in sort of conservative thought, especially among Catholics. I mean, Chesterton is huge. So maybe if he was writing this a little bit later, Chesterton would have made the list and had maybe even a chapter to himself a little bit more. And of course, if he was writing this later, Tolkien would have needed a chapter as well, no matter how much people try to argue that he wasn't a conservative, even though he's just a very, very traditional Catholic and traditionally political person. But I digress.
Well, and I think his philosophical and religious beliefs were not commonly known during
Yeah,
his
that's true.
during his lifetime. It wasn't only until after his letter, like everybody appreciated his art that they started studying his thoughts and his letters to his son and all
Right.
that. And I don't think he would have had access to it.
That's true. That's true.
And I think of all the it's funny of all this many seasons. I did want to say one thing. Like
Hmm.
he says on 358. So I know I have a couple more pages to go in this chapter, and he says of British conservatism between the two world wars, it is difficult to write anything worth reading. Okay, well, that's a segue for me to close this book.
Yeah.
Uh, I powered through, but of all the stuff that we've gone through and I've ranted and raved about or whatever, I think the thing that has had the most impact on me was probably Tolkien Dogmatics
Hmm.
by our friend, what's his name? What was his name?
Austin Freeman.
Um, Austin Freeman. Isn't he the one that wrote that one?
Yeah,
Or is
yeah,
that
yeah.
a different? That was his,
No, that's
right?
Austin
Yeah.
Freeman. Yeah, yeah.
Because I think that's where I was like, you know what? I think Tolkien's 100% right about uh, creativity
Hmm.
being is really the purpose of life as like God is the creator and we're created in his image, and so that we're on this earth to create things,
Hmm.
other humans or whatever the case may be. Uh, so yeah, I mean, to leave Tolkien out, I think is just an oversight because he wasn't
Yeah.
known at the time,
Well, I
even though he
mean,
was
yeah, this
there.
this was published, I think, even before The Lord of the Rings was published. So Tolkien had
Right,
published The
right.
Hobbit, and he was basically just an Oxford, scholar of Old English literature at that point and children's book author. So he would have had absolutely zero reason to include him in this book. But I'm saying if Conservative Mind was written today,
Yeah,
I think you would have
right.
had to include Tolkien.
Well, and we wouldn't even been at the Tolkien point anyway, because Tolkien really, I think his views kind of solidified after World War One, right? Wasn't he in
Yeah,
World War
yeah, yeah.
One?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So
yeah,
when he came back and all that, that war, boy, I mean, obviously it was a big war. A lot of
yeah.
people died. Um, there's so much happened. I mean, the Russian Revolution. I mean, so much um, was destroyed
Hmm.
and evil was created, but also, some people got the right lesson, like Tolkien.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, exactly,
others.
exactly. Well, that's all I
But
have for this episode.
any other thoughts? What are your
Yeah,
final thoughts? Yeah,
I
you
think
got
that's
no
all I
other
have.
thoughts?
No, no, no other
Okay.
thoughts. I think that
All right,
wraps things
I'm
up.
out.
Yes.
But if
Uh,
you want to poke the bear, I'm sure you can get me going on something. You mentioned
That's all right.
Tolkien,
I
so
think I've gotten you
it's
going
like
on so many things already.
it's like a red flag. Was a red flag to a bull? A red,
Hmm.
something. Although
Hmm.
they're colorblind, I don't know.
That's true. That's true. Well, in that case, this has been season 14, episode 11 of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. I have been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.